The 18 Strong Podcast, episode number 142 with Dean Somerset.
This isn't easy stuff. This is stuff that should take a lot out of you when you do it properly. But the only way that mobility is going to give you anything is if it costs something. So you have to put out that level of intensity to see the tissues actually physiologically alter themselves to allow that new range of motion to occur.
Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, where you get direct access to the world's greatest experts on training harder, practicing smarter, and playing better golf. Now, here's your host, Jeff Pellizzero.
Hey, welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, where we chat with some of the greatest coaches, professionals, golfers, and other personalities in the golf world and outside of the golf world in order to help you on your mission of becoming a better golfer, becoming a fitter, healthier human being, and moving better, being stronger, and playing better golf. And this week, I'm excited to announce our special guest of the week, who is Dean Somerset. Dean is one of the most well-respected individuals in the world of strength and conditioning and exercise science, and especially with our initiative of Mobility May this past month, where we've been sharing different videos on Instagram, just reposting different people's drills and exercises they've been doing on their own, working on their own mobility. And Dean is the creator of a product called Ruthless Mobility, so it was very fitting to bring him on the show this week. But just a little background on Dean: he's an exercise physiologist and a personal trainer in Edmonton, Canada. And he works with a wide range of clients, from Paralympic champions to surgical recovery patients and everybody in between. He's lectured around the world to other trainers, physical therapists, and chiropractors on topics that are devoted to improving mobility, strength, function. As I mentioned, he is the creator of Ruthless Mobility, but also recently co-created a product called the Complete Shoulder and Hip Blueprint with another very well-known strength coach by the name of Tony Gentilcore. And you'll hear a little bit about the Complete Shoulder and Hip Blueprint in the episode here. But as I mentioned, Dean is super well-respected. He's written for many top publications in health and fitness, and he doesn't work with many golfers, but we talk about how the fundamentals really pretty much carry over into whatever it is that you're doing, whether that be basic sport or just everyday functions of life, how sometimes you have to focus on those fundamentals and those basics, and as he says, get ruthlessly good or savagely efficient at some of these basic things before you can progress on. You don't have to always change everything up. So we also talk, obviously, about being ruthless when it comes to your mobility and what that actually means. You know, there's often a very big component that people forget about, or maybe don't even realize, that needs to be in conjunction with their movement training, their mobility training, especially you as a golfer trying to improve your, motion of your rotation or whatever it is, your hips, your shoulders. There's a very key component, and that's the intensity portion of it. That's the getting ruthless in whatever you're doing. And so we go into pretty much depth there. And then we also discuss that there's possible times when you have to adapt certain things, whether that's a lift, your golf stance, your swing, or whatever, to fit your body and to fit how it feels and what feels right for you. And we talk about when you should do that and when you can work around that, or when you should work around that. So very excited to bring Dean on the show. But before bringing him on, as always, I want to say a quick thanks to our sponsors, which is the PGA Tour mobile app. And this app is able to do so many different things. It has schedules, it has real-time scoring for PGA events, it's got video highlights, player stats, course profiles, it's even got pictures and images of the different course that the guys are playing on a weekly basis. But I wanted to highlight a special feature that it has, which is the on-site feature. So if you're at a tournament or you're planning to go to a tournament, this is something you're definitely going to want to pay attention to. Basically, it makes the tournament experience that much better. You're able to go on the app and you can find your other friends that might be at the tournament, so you can kind of look up where they are so you can go find them. You can know exactly where your favorite player is on the course. So when you're there and you're trying to figure out where you need to go, what hole you need to be on, you can look up specifically if you want to go follow Ricky Fowler or Jordan Spieth or somebody like that. You can go directly and see where they are in live time, where they are. It also offers you special bonuses for downloading the app. So when you download the app, you get special bonuses and things on there. And then you'll never have to worry about holding on to your tickets. The app will have your tickets in there, so you don't have to worry about losing your tickets, and you'll always have them on you because they'll always be in your phone. If you're heading to an event anytime soon, be sure to pick up the mobile app so you can have all these features in your pocket. You can go to the App Store to get it. You can get it on Android, iPhone, BlackBerry, all the devices that you could possibly have in your pocket. Go to the App Store or just go to pgatour.com and you can find the link to get to the app of your preferred choice. All right, let's get into the interview with the man of ruthless mobility, Dean Somerset. Dean Somerset, welcome to the 18 Strong podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on, man.
Hey, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on here. I love being able to talk about anything sport performance or human motion related. And golf is something that Edmonton takes very seriously for about 6 months of the year when we're not in minus 40 weather. So that's good.
Right. Do you play yourself?
You know, I try to get out as much as I can. I've got a set of clubs in the basement, but since we moved into our new house about 2 years ago, I haven't had a chance to even hit the driving range. I normally would try to get out a couple times a year, but the time that it takes to actually play around, I just don't have the schedule availability for it.
Yeah, that's kind of the challenge for pretty much everybody listening to the show, myself included. I don't. Everybody asks me how many times if I played a bunch this year. I don't get out more than double digits, 10 times a year. And it's mainly because we're all so busy. We're all trying to, do everything we can professionally, physically, whatever. And that's really a big reason why I wanted to bring you on, because I know, as everybody heard in the intro, you're a coach that travels around the world speaking, working with professionals on strength and function and performance. And, basically we all want to do it in the most efficient way possible. And I know that you've got a lot of good ideas on, some of the most important things that we need to focus on. And, the different mobility drills and the hips and the shoulders, and it's kind of your specialty. So first, I want to ask you about the basement, because you mentioned you have your golf clubs in your basement. So this is a total different tangent, but you on your Instagram are the proud owner of the Basement of Champions. Explain that for us, please.
Yeah, the Basement of Champions is just a funny name I gave to my home gym my wife and I use. So we've got about 700 square feet in our basement with 9.5 foot ceilings, squat rack, dumbbells from 10 to 80, kettlebells from 8 to 40 kilograms, glute ham raise, TV, sound system, bands, pulleys, pretty much everything you could ask for in a basement gym. But we just call it the Basement of Champions because how else do you know that it's a fantastic facility unless you put champions there? Plus, we also have the WWE Championship belt, which if you're going to be a champ, how does anyone else know that you're the champ if you don't have a belt?
You ran right into my next segue, which was the WWE Championship belt. As I was doing my detailed research for the show, obviously I had to go straight to your Instagram feed. And, you post a lot of your tips and things that you're doing and your own personal workouts, but you use those as ways to educate and teach people, which I love. But I noticed that the WWE belt is always somewhere off on the side. So first of all, is there a story behind how you got it? Or is there a way that other people take it away from you?
Well, the big story is that I went on WWE.com and purchased it. So that's how I came to get it. Nice. Yeah. So I went the easy route. It's like I got the jersey for the championship team and probably wear that, right? But the big rules are that if anyone PRs that day, like if I have friends or family over and they had a PR in the gym, they get to wear the belt. If somebody does something really cool or amazing, cool, they get to wear the belt too. But usually it's just like an Easter egg that pops up in a lot of the Instagram feeds. So you just got to look for it and know where it is.
I love it. All right. Speaking of, on a little more serious note, about something I did see on your Instagram post, which was, I think it was kind of a repost from maybe a tweet that you had, which talked about the idea of, I think the actual post, and I'll put it up in the show notes, it said consistency equals results, variety equals followers. And basically you talked about the fact that, we get on Instagram, we see all these sexy moves, we see all these different variations of different things. But when we get down to it, the consistency is what really hones in and makes us better at whatever we're doing. Can you explain that a little further?
Absolutely. I mean, we could tie that into the golfing audience that you have here. I mean, you want to have your swing as consistent as possible, which means that you practice the exact same mechanics of it over and over and over and over and over again. You don't do one swing while you're standing on a Bosu, another swing while you're standing on your right foot only, one where you're only swinging with your left arm. I mean, that's great to teach individual movement mechanics and break things down, but how is that going to overlie onto what your actual swing mechanics are going to look like? If you're doing 1,000 different types of exercises, you're not actually going to become good at any of them. You're just doing a whole bunch of variety of stuff. So to actually get better at movement is a skill, just like a golf swing, just like a free throw in basketball, just like a kick in soccer. Any of that kind of stuff is skill based. So you have to become very good at it to make it repeatable over time. And the only way that you can really do that is practice. So when people are in the gym saying, well, I want to do something new every single day, that's great for the entertainment feature of it and to make you not feel like you're working out. But are you actually getting better? Can you show measurable improvements in your outcomes if you're not doing a similar thing from day 1 to day 2, and then even to day 7,944? So if you're not measuring your progress, or you have no way of measuring progress, how do you know if what you're doing is actually benefiting you or not?
What are some of the bigger things that you feel like should be kind of the big components that we should be working on a daily basis? And I'm not talking about golf specifically yet. Just as people moving, we have daily functional activities that we have to do. What are some of the things that if you took just your everyday average Joe, that you would kind of make sure, hey, this is what I want you to get good at first, and then let's dive off into these other rabbit holes?
Yeah. The biggest ones I would say would be adequate movement from the joints you're using. And when I say adequate, it doesn't mean that you have to be Gumby or bending into weird yoga contortionist poses. That's cool if you can do that. But if the only thing that you really have to make your hips do is swing a golf club and pick the ball up out of the hole, then you have to have the mobility to do that kind of stuff. So it's not putting it out into such a big, broad space to say that, well, you have to do mobility, you have to do this. If you already have the mobility to do what you want to do, cool. Keep it. Keep using it. You don't have to worry about gaining more unless there's more stuff that you want to do that involves a bigger range of motion. You should have enough strength to do this kind of stuff that you want to do as well, which means that if you have to drive the ball 300 yards, you have to be able to put 300 yards worth of drive through that golf club, whether that's coming from your hips, whether it's coming from your core, your shoulders, your neck, any of that kind of stuff. Have enough strength to do the kind of stuff you want to do. If you're doing landscaping work, you have to be able to lift the wheelbarrow and move it around on rough terrain. You have to have the strength to be able to do that kind of stuff. Then you have to have the work capacity to be able to do it for the time frame that you're required to do it. If you're an Ironman athlete, that's a long time to spend doing any one thing. If you're a 100-meter sprinter, you still have to put out the work for 100 meters, but then you have to recover to be able to do it again and again and again for the duration of your training. If you're a hockey player, your shift is going to be about 45 seconds to 60 seconds. I don't know what area of the world you're in. I don't know if hockey's big down there right now, but if you're playing hockey, you work really hard for a short period of time, but then you have to recover to be able to put out that same power output again later. So work capacity is as much about what you can do with that time frame that you have, but then also how do you recover to be able to put out that power again. So the biggest key components are, do you have the mobility to be able to do what you want to do, the strength to be able to do what you want to do, and the work capacity to be able to do it as long and as much as you want to do it.
So you mentioned the word mobility in there, and in the month of May, we kind of do a little bit of an initiative that we call Mobility May. And on Instagram, we have just different individuals posting videos of just different drills that they're doing themselves, what they're working on, to kind of inspire golfers to get moving and working a little bit. Now, you have a product called Ruthless Mobility, which is a badass name, by the way. So I want you first kind of describe the name Ruthless Mobility, what you meant by that, what kind of triggered that phrase itself. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about, gaining more mobility. When should we be working on mobility and those types of things?
Well, a lot of people approach mobility as if it's supposed to be a soft, kind, gentle type of activity. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to see lasting changes to your physiology, whether it's adding new sarcomeres in series to your muscle, whether it's creating a deformation to the joint capsule, or allowing the bones to align into a different position, there has to be a level of force application to that tissue. The Wolff's Law, it says the bones will only absorb to the position of, or to the amount of force that's being put onto them. That's why things like osteoporosis occur, because the bones aren't used to being loaded that much, so they start wearing away. The specific adaptation of imposed demands means that if you're not actually putting a joint into a position and generating some level of force, that range of motion isn't a position that you're going to be strong in. So we can get really deep down the rabbit holes in neurophysiology, all that kind of stuff. But when I came up with the name Ruthless Mobility, it was all about the concept of using a higher level of intensity to approach our mobility. So when most people approach it, like I said, it's a kind, soft, gentle, basic static stretch. But I'm talking about using a 1 rep max deadlift level of intensity to do a stretch, or to do an activation drill, or to do some form of mobilization. This isn't easy stuff. This is stuff that should take a lot out of you when you do it properly. But the only way that mobility is going to give you anything is if it costs something. So you have to put out that level of intensity to see the tissues actually physiologically alter themselves to allow that new range of motion to occur.
So when you're talking about this intensity, and I know that, I went through some of the FRC stuff. I went to the FRC course, and they talked a lot about the irradiation. And I know that you've been through those, and you know those guys really well. And that's where I first heard about the idea of the whole intensity portion or saw the real benefit of it. So when you're talking about this, I mean, you can actually get tired, just like you said, like a one rep deadlift by doing some of this stuff. How do you go about teaching your clients how important that is when they're doing this stuff?
Yeah, and to jump on that, I love the FRC course just due to the fact that it was great confirmation bias for me. It showed that what I was talking about and what I was doing was in line with what they were speaking on too. Guys like Somerset.Dean, when he came out with his mobility workshops as well, he was talking about the concept of irradiation. He was talking about the concept of intensity with your mobility training. So this isn't something that's brand new, but it's something that I don't think gets the airplay that it should, based on the fact that it is very beneficial, but it's hard. It's not something that's very easy. So when I'm teaching my clients how to do it, the first thing we do is simply get them into a position where they can actually feel what's going on. And then we do graded contractions up a ladder. So 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100%. So that way it's not just put them in a position to say, okay, go max as hard as you can right now, and they wind up tearing something or cramping and spasming until their face explodes. I'm sure when you took the FRC, you had a few of those fun adventures, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so getting them used to the position first before we start ramping it up. The good analogy that I would use for that is if you have somebody who has never worked out a day in their life and you say, okay, I want you to sprint across that field as hard and fast as you can. They're not ready for that.
Right.
They're going to wind up either getting injured or defeated, or something's going to go wrong because they just can't handle that intensity. Their body doesn't know what to do with it. So in order to get the intensity up when they're doing some mobility, you got to kind of slowly build up to it. So 20%, 40%, 80%, 100%. And that might be over the span of 5 minutes. That might be over the span of maybe 5 weeks. That might be something where they never get to that 100% intensity because they just fall apart when they get up to that level. But the goal is to get them up to that point where they're able to still maintain it, but they're working as hard as they can tolerate.
Could you just to have us a visual of what we're talking about here? Because I know that a lot of the people listening are not in the fitness world. They're not fitness professionals. Give us an example of maybe an area where you're working on mobility, let's say for the shoulder, and you're working on some of these graded contractions just so they can get an idea of what that maybe looks like. Or maybe even take the hamstrings, for instance. That's usually a pretty easy one, or something along those lines.
Yeah, a great one is shoulder overhead motion. So think about how many golfers can't put their arms over their head. A lot of it comes down to the fact that the hands are always in front of them or below to a certain point. So if I have a golfer who can't put their arm up over their head, I might get them to go against a wall. So facing into a wall, use the wall to assist them to get up into a position. They lean forward to get a bit of overstretch onto it, and then they try to actively pull their arm off of the wall to try to get some of the contraction of the back of their shoulder and the shoulder blade tilting down to actually pull their arm into that overhead position. So they're not concentrically accessing the range of motion, which is where you would contract to raise the arm up into that position, but they're isometrically activating it in a position where they wouldn't have been able to get there on their own because now they're using the wall to help them get into that new range. So another option that you could do is just a thoracic rotation too. Cross your arms on your shoulders and try to rotate just with the ribs up as far to the side as you can, like you're getting into your backswing for your golf, and then try to squeeze an extra millimeter or 3 out of that range, trying to pull as far into it as you can possibly get. Breathe, brace, and try to just get as far into it as those joints and muscles will allow without pain, but working up the ladder for that intensity.
And then what is it that happens when we use that intensity? Why is it that works so well to then improve, you'll see a definite improvement right away. Mm-hmm. But then over time, that might diminish and then it gets better and it gets better. Why does it work first? And then why do we lose that after, that session and you go back the next day and you don't have that range of motion again?
Yeah, part of it comes down to you're training the nervous system as well as the muscle, as well as the joints, all that kind of stuff. The physiological adaptation as far as like laying down new tissue or altering how much collagen and elastin is in the joint capsule, that takes time. That might be weeks or months or even a couple of years. But when you see immediate changes and stuff, a lot of that comes down to the nervous system recognizing a new position that you weren't able to get to before and being able to remember how to access it again. So the best way to think of it is if I've never driven a certain way to work, I have no idea how to get there. But after I've driven that way once, cool, I can remember how to do it again. I drive there 20 times, great, I remember how to do it automatically. I won't even remember how I got to work after the 100th time. I just know that I turn here, I go straight here, I go fast here, there's photo radar over here. It just becomes an automatic process. Your body learns how to do what it does and becomes efficient at what it does over and over and over again. So when it comes to learning that position, It's all about the novelty of where you haven't been and trying to break that down. Get the body to a position where it hasn't been. Get the body to use a level of intensity to kind of cement its ownership and stability and motor control in that pattern, and then get it to do it again and again to build up the repeatability and the practice of it.
One of the things that I know people struggle with sometimes is, when do I work on this stuff, and what do I need to be working on? And as I was going through some of your articles and things, you talk about self-assessing and being able to figure out, what you need to work on, because sometimes people they do stretches because, I think I'm supposed to do that stretch, not necessarily that's the stretch for them. How do you go about teaching someone to self-assess so they can do it, whether they're at the golf course, they're at the gym, they're at home, those kind of things?
Yeah, part of it comes down to breakdown of figuring out what they want to do. So if they have a specific goal set, like let's say they want to be a golfer, we know what the mobility demands are on that. We know that it's a one-sided sport. We know that the lead leg has to get more internal rotation than the back leg. You know that the thoracic rotation is huge. Hip explosion out of the backswing is huge. If the person's not doing that kind of stuff properly, the lumbar spine, the low back, it tends to get chewed up in the process, or they wind up with things like shoulder impingement, all sorts of junk. So if somebody comes in and they say, I have a specific injury and it hurts any time I play golf, well, now we got to play a little bit of double diligence on this to figure out what's going on with their movement, and can I actually find a way to make them move better so that they can play the sport they want to play without jamming things up and making things hurt even more. So part of it comes down to figuring out what their sport is, what their activity is. Maybe they play basketball or they're a cyclist or something like that. What's the demands of their sport? Then we go through just a very easy mobility assessment, see how much range of motion is through each joint. So if I know that lead leg needs internal rotation to be able to actually rotate through, I want to see internal rotation of the hip. How much do you have and how much do you have available to use? Can you actually control that full range of motion? So if I was to grab your hip and rotate it to this position, but then when I say you contract on your own, you can only get like 2 or 3 inches into that range, whereas I could grab it and move it 10 inches. You've got a whole bunch of range of motion that you don't know how to control. So then we have to start thinking, okay, well, now you've got that range. We don't need to deform the tissue to get you into that position, but we might need to work on motor control. We might need to work on graded tension drills like we were talking about earlier. If somebody's, let's say they're 70 or 80 years old and they're coming in saying, I want more mobility for golf, and they have 0 degrees of internal rotation on that lead leg, and they have osteoarthritis, and they have bone-on-bone contact, what do? I mean, we can't really stretch that very effectively, because when you hit bone to bone, you're done. You can't really stretch bone into bone any further without bad things happening. So it's kind of like if I was to try to stretch my face through a wall. It's not going to go well for my face or for the wall. And this is the moneymaker. So I got to keep that looking pristine, right? So at those point in times, the guy's got to start thinking, okay, well, what's the cost of doing business here when it comes to golf? I need internal rotation on my hip, but you don't have any. So where am I going to get that rotation? Well, it's going to have to come from your lower back, or it's going to have to come from your upper back. And if it's not coming from one or the other, something else is going to have to do twice the work to be able to pick it up. Maybe we have to adjust your stance when you're addressing the ball. So instead of having both feet parallel, that lead leg, we turn it out 20 or 30 degrees to kind of make up the difference for internal rotation. Maybe we need to get you in front of a really good golf pro who knows how to adjust swing mechanics for somebody, rather than just saying, here is the way you swing a golf club. Everyone swings it the exact same, and just adapt it to the individual who's in front of them.
I think you made a great point about, just kind of active versus passive range of motion, something, being able to rotate your hip. And if somebody can physically put you in that position, that means that, okay, there's some room to improve. Now we just need to work on you getting better, you getting stronger, and actually kind of owning that motion. One of the other things that I noticed in a few of your videos was even doing some of this stuff when working on, say, a deadlift or something, altering the foot position, changing a little bit. I like that, there's not one specific perfect way to do it, and you kind of give some freedom of movement to let people change. When you're doing that with a deadlift, let's say, and you're maybe staggering their stance or turning their foot out, is that something that you want to then progress to get them eventually to that perfect position, or do you just kind of go with, hey, whatever feels comfortable, and then you'll naturally gravitate towards a better position? It's time to thank our other featured sponsor of the show this week, which is Rad Roller, and you can find the products at radroller.com. If you don't know about Rad Roller, they are some of the greatest soft tissue myofascial release products that are out there on the market, and they're not only great for you as a golfer to work on your body for your golf game, but just this past weekend, I realized that they are so good for just some of the other everyday activities that we have. I had to do a big backyard project, was working with wheelbarrows and shovels and doing all this digging and all kinds of stuff, And I have to say, even though, I tend to put in some time on working on the body, I still woke up like an old man feeling the aches and pains and tweaks and everything. And the first thing that I did was pull out the rad ball and start working on some different spots, working on the spine and the upper shoulders and the neck, because the body's just not used to doing some of those other tasks like digging and shoveling and hauling things in a wheelbarrow. So whether it be for your golf game, whether it be for your backyard projects, or whether it be for just your fitness and your mobility in general, the Rad Roller products are so good at helping you find and pinpoint those little areas of your body that you're having trouble working out the knots, or you're having trouble loosening up before you do some of your strength training or your mobility drills. They have specifically designed these products to fit different areas of your body, different sizes, different shapes, different textures, in order to tackle each one of these different troublesome areas. So if you haven't checked out the Rad Roller products, go to radroller.com. You can look at their wide array of products, all of them very easy to carry with you, easy to travel with. So if you're constantly on the go, or you're going to a different golf trip, or you can even store some of these things in your bag. They're that small and easy to carry. So just go to radroller.com, and if you decide to purchase anything, use the code 18STRONG to make sure you get your discount.
Yeah, we might make it something where every now and then we adjust just to see if something else is working differently. But if it keeps coming back as this is the best pattern for you because you feel strong, you feel stable, you're moving the weight really quickly and nothing hurts, why would I want to break that? If it's something where it is maybe a muscle imbalance or a tension weakness or issue or something along that line, over time as the person gets stronger, it should be something that corrects out. But what you look at, a lot of the research on anatomical differences in individuality, most people aren't symmetric. Most people are going to have differences between left and right that you just can't fix. It's like saying how many people can write with their right hand as well as they can with their left hand. There's always stories where there's those people who are ambidextrous, but it's usually for one or two specific skills, but not for everything. And when you think about things like hip anatomy, shoulder anatomy, all that kind of stuff, there's going to be about a 10 to 20 degree difference between left hip and right hip in terms of how far the acetabulum, the actual hip socket, points forward or back or even sideways. There could be a difference in what angle the femoral neck makes as it attaches into the hip socket. There could be differences in leg lengths between one side to another. So all of those features come into play and say, well, if every hip is individual in one way or another, whether it's the left hip or the right hip for that individual, it's something where you can't necessarily say we have to be symmetric. And a lot of the time, an asymmetric stance is just how that person is built. So it might be something where one foot turns out 20 degrees and cool, you just live with that and train it. If I try to put that person back into a symmetric stance, now we have an asymmetric tension on both of those hips. So if I want to try to get a nice straight deadlift going straight up and down where the person is not shifting their hips side to side or anything funky like that, same thing with the back squat. If somebody's shifting their hips side to side all the time, rocking like Ariana Grande in there, we got to be able to switch things up a little bit and maybe take a mild asymmetric stance to help correct that asymmetric movement coming out of that symmetric stance. And it might be something where the left glute is tighter than the right glute when it's in that symmetric setup. You turn out that left toe just enough, and now you have balanced tension left and right. So you can actually shoot it out of the hole a lot easier.
Now, I know that probably the best answer here is go see a professional that can assess you and they can look at your physical structures. But what are some pieces of advice that you might give somebody that's, they go to the gym, they're doing this stuff on their own, and they're kind of self-assessing as they go. What are some guidelines as to, okay, that's probably just maybe anatomical stuff that you can kind of get away with the variations, or no, that's something that you need to fix and you need to work on in order to get better, in order to improve it, whatever you're doing?
The biggest thing you could say is play around with stuff. Figure out what works well for you and what you do really well. So I always make it the reference is sort of like if you go to an optometrist. I don't know if you wear glasses or not, but when you go to the optometrist, they'll put the machine in front of your eyes and then they'll switch the lenses back and forth and say, which one do you see better from? Is it this one or is it this one? And they'll go back and forth and then they'll flip that one out, put a new one in. What about this one? What about that one? So they're trying to figure out how you see. And they can't tell you what one you work better with and what one you don't work better with. They're just going by what you give them as feedback. So if I have somebody going through a squat pattern, I'm going to say, how do you feel with that? Do you feel any pain through your knees, your hips, your back, or anything like that? Do you feel strong and stable, or do you feel like you're unbalanced and about to fall over? Do you feel like you're powerful coming out of that hole? Do you feel like you have some strength with that to be able to lift some copious amounts of weight? If not, let's turn your toe out and see how you feel there. Is this one better or is that one better? Just like the optometrist, is this lens better or is that lens better? And then we play around with it. We do the toe out, we do another toe out, we do a foot back, foot forward, and we just go through a series of different stances and say, okay, well, tell me which one you feel best with. And I want you to keep a mental inventory with that to be able to say, well, what do I feel best with? And then play around with that position and say, how is this feeling? How is that feeling? Just find the stuff that works well for you. There's no one stance that's going to be best for anybody. A lot of it just comes down to finding what works naturally well for you. Now, where you might, just to jump back where you said, when would you want to have a professional? If any of those positions, or if all of them, create some form of pain, or if you have a movement that just doesn't add up right, like when we were talking earlier, like a lateral hip shift, or you're rolling on your toes, or you keep falling over, that's times when you actually want to see somebody who can break it down and give you a set of that third vision to be able to see what's going on with your swing, with your squat, with your deadlift, all that kind of stuff. So like, there's a lot of stuff you can do on your own just by self-analysis and saying what feels best with me. But if stuff starts breaking down or causing problems, that's when you want to get in front of a professional.
Well, and I think this kind of goes back to the whole idea of the consistency piece. And if you're constantly doing different things, like jumping around to different exercises and trying to do what's cool and unique, you can never really figure out that trial and error process and find what really works for you for, say, your deadlift or your squat or split squat or whatever it might be. If you're constantly jumping around and doing these crazy things, you never really find that real pattern. I want to going back to the mobility piece real quick. When you're doing some of the high intensity stuff, a question that I've always had is, how do you work that into a regular programming when you're doing some heavier lifts, or you're doing a basic workout program? When do you bring in some of those things, say for the different joints, when you're exerting all that energy and it's like a max deadlift? How do you program that in?
Part of it comes to what phase of the training they're in. So if it's somebody who just started with me, we probably won't be doing heavy lifting if they have significant mobility restrictions to prevent them from doing heavy lifting. We might start off with more involved mobility stuff to get them the range of motion necessary to do the activities properly. So if I have somebody who can't hip flex past 90 degrees, sitting in a chair is all they can do for hip flexion. They can't grab a bar off the floor, because in order to do that, you need like 110, 120, 130, depending on how long that person's legs are and how short their torso is. So if I have somebody who cannot access that range of motion, I want to be able to see if I can get them a little bit more before we start putting a bar in their hands and telling them to yank it off the floor. So if that person in mobility is a big restriction for them, that is their program to start with. I want them to work on improving the mobility before we start loading strength on top of it. If somebody's got the mobility for it and they want to get stronger, cool. We might use just like an activation series. So just do a warm up with some of the active mobility work to make sure that they can actually control that range before we start loading it up. Make it sort of like a self-assessment. How are you feeling today? How are you ready to train today? Are we able to put a bar in your hands and you feel comfortable with it? Or do you feel like everything's just kind of falling apart? I mean, I'm sure you have some clients where they come in on Monday, they feel like they can just tear the doors off the place. Tuesday, they come in and they feel like they just got run over by a truck and nothing's working right. And it might be through no fault of yours or theirs, but it's just the day that just occurred. Like yesterday, we had a big temperature shift. It was about 85 degrees on Tuesday. Yesterday and Wednesday went down to about 35 degrees, or not 35, 45 degrees. And it was 90 or 50, 60 mile an hour winds. I'm trying to do metric to American conversions in my head.
I can't 50 to 60. Either, so.
Yeah, mile an hour winds. It rained about 6 or 7 inches. So we had a huge day, one day fluctuation where it went from very hot and warm to very cold and windy. And everyone was coming in feeling crushed. Like their energy was low, their joints hurt, their muscles didn't want to warm up properly. And that's something that neither they or I could change because we can't control the weather. One day I'll be able to, but until that day comes, I got to keep doing what I'm doing. But that's just the way it is, right? So if somebody comes into the gym on Monday feeling like they can just tear the place apart, and Wednesday they feel just beat up and broken, that active warm-up and that active mobility series is a great self-assessment to say, what can I do today? If they're just tearing through things all day long, it's going to be a good day. We're going to set some PRs. But if everything is struggling, energy is not there, mobility is not there, they feel defeated and beat up, we're going to just go through the motions and get some volume on them. Make sure they're moving well, make sure they're doing stuff, but then just make sure that at the end of the day, they feel better than when they came in.
Let's say you're working with somebody and they've got some shoulder restriction or something, difficulty with the overhead pressing motion or just reaching overhead, and you're working on kind of a traditional workout program. Maybe you're doing an upper body day, lower body day, but you know that they have to work on that, and so you're staying out of those ranges with a lot of your weighted stuff. When would you have them do some mobility stuff as homework on their own, or while they're in there doing maybe a leg day, do you throw in some upper body mobility work? How do you kind of spread that out a little bit?
Yeah, a little of both, actually. So I usually don't program just an upper and a lower body day. I might do like total body days where we might focus a little bit more on like a pressing focus or more of a squat focus or hip focus or something like that. So one of the great things about doing mobility work is you can use it as a filler exercise in between other stuff. So if I have a client doing something like a 1-foot lunge or a static squat or something like that, I can have them do the recovery work of go over against a wall and I want you to pull your arm back like we were talking about earlier. Or I can have them do some external rotation, pushing against a band or something along that lines. So they're working on doing some upper body mobility work, which has a very low cost in terms of their metabolic work, their neural drive, their strength, their energy, all that kind of stuff. But it has very big payoff to get that repetition in and get reps and reps and reps of learning where that position is, generating tension into it, generating a little bit of force. So it's not something where we're forcing a range of motion, but they're just learning how to access that range of motion more effectively. They might get homework on their own, but you and I both know that a lot of clients might not do mobility homework, especially if it's slightly uncomfortable. They need you there to be able to say, okay, well, do this and only this. No, you're not doing it right. Push harder, push harder. And if they try to do it on their own, it's like, well, I'm just going to go swing by a club in the backyard and drink a beer and have a fun day. If you have dedicated, devoted clients that are willing to do it, they'll see faster progress. But at the end of the day, life is what it is. I'm not going to say, well, you have to do this, otherwise you're a failure as a human being.
Yeah, that's where I've always kind of struggled with some of my clients is knowing that exactly that, when they're not in the gym, the dedication to it is not always necessarily the same as it is when they're in the gym. So trying to figure out when to put that stuff in mobility-wise. So that makes a lot of sense. All right. Another topic, obviously, with golfers is back pain. Back pain is a constant issue. What are some of the things that we need to think about when somebody comes in or when somebody's struggling with pain after a round, lower back, lumbar type stuff? What will be some of the first things that you end up looking at?
Well, a lot of it will come down to, figuring out what some of the triggers are for that pain. If it's something that is a mechanical issue, we can fix it by adjusting the mechanics. If it's something that's bigger and broader than that, when we start looking at the biopsychosocial model, then we have to start thinking about what other factors might be contributing to that pain. Now, part of it could be just as simple as saying, when you play golf, your back hurts. Have you had periods of time where you don't play golf for like a month or so and your back gets better? If that's the case, great. Well, we've kind of drilled down to be able to say, well, the golfing motion may actually be a trigger for you. So let's figure out what's going on in there. Maybe it's situational around work, or maybe it's family life or something like that. Maybe golf is an escape for them. Who knows? But at that point, you just have to kind of drill down and figure out what's going on. Depending on what's going on with their back, maybe they have like a disc issue, or maybe they have facet joint issue, or maybe they do all of their movement from their lumbar spine versus from their hips. You can look at what's going on with a lot of movement patterns and be able to break it down and say, well, you're doing this a lot, and that's something that probably would contribute to some back pain. So let's try to do something different and see if that has an effect at the end of the day. And if they're very sensitized to their spine, it might be something where you got to tread so lightly that it almost feels like you're doing nothing. And when you talk with guys like Stu McGill, who's like the back doctor guru of all time, he'll say that all of the high-level golfers that he's worked with, every single one of them has back pain. Because you figure how many times they swing that club in their life, how hard and aggressively they swing that club. Eventually something starts breaking down. But when you're looking at how that movement actually occurs, when you watch how amateur golfers swing, everything gets involved with it. When you watch some of the elite guys, it almost looks like their spine doesn't move. It's just a steel rod that just rotates. And a lot of the drive comes from their legs, from their hips, and from their shoulders. So it could come down to mechanics. It could also just come down to wear and tear on that one side dominant activity. Think about a baseball pitcher. They only throw with their dominant hand. So their dominant hand is the only side that's going to get injured. When you think about a golfer, they're only going to rotate one direction. So if they're going to develop any kind of an injury, it's going to be a rotational intolerance in the direction of their golf swing. So how do you fix that? Well, the best obvious advice is don't play golf.
Right.
But it's also the worst advice you could give, because what do golfers want to do? They want to golf. Same thing with runners. If you tell a runner not to run, they're going to hate you and go run 50K that day just to be able to prove you're wrong, and then not be able to walk for the rest of the week.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of Stu McGill and talking about golfers, that everybody that he's worked with has back pain. I'm curious to get your input on the subject. We see guys like Rory going down with back pain, Jason Day, all these guys. And so the big topic is, oh my gosh, these guys are working out, and it's their fitness. It's the higher level of fitness that they're doing that is causing these issues. What would somebody like you say to that argument?
John Daly had back pain, and I don't think anyone would claim that he had too much fitness. Right. So it's one of those things where at any level of elite performance, any sport, no matter what, injuries happen. You look at basketball, hockey, football, disc golf, anything like that. It's always going to happen in one way or another. You push the limits of human performance and stuff is eventually going to break down. The longer you're in a sport, the more likely you are to have an injury. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do in the gym incorrectly that might lead to an injury. And there's a lot of things that you might do correctly that have zero benefit to actually preventing that injury. So it's just a matter of, how long can you actually go? If you have a smart, well-designed training program, it can help extend your playing career significantly. But even then, no matter what you do, you're always kind of pushing back against the clock. I mean, I don't know what Rory's specific training program looks like, what his trainers or his therapists or anybody like that are doing to keep him active or keep him healthy or anything like that. So I can't comment specifically on whether he's doing everything he should be doing, or whether he's not doing everything he should be doing. So, I mean, that would be irresponsible for me to comment on that. But I would say that he's probably got a great team of people that are very invested in doing a good job to make sure that he continues to play. Because if he doesn't play, they don't get paid. So I'm thinking that it's one of those things where, everyone can do the right thing and stuff can still go wrong. Right. So, I mean, no matter what, you're in a very viciously dynamic sport that requires you to do the same high intensity thing over and over and over and over again for weeks and months at a time. There's not really much of an off season in professional golf. They're not really getting that downtime like you would in something like football or hockey or basketball or anything like that, where you actually have a dedicated off season. If they do, they're still on the course spending hours at a time working on swing mechanics. So if I keep picking at a blister or a scab or something like that, it's just going to keep being irritated and never heal properly. Those guys are working their butts off all year long. So eventually something's going to break down.
Yeah, it's great input. All right, I want to shift gears just a little bit because as I was kind of reading your background, I noticed that you have worked with a lot of Paralympic athletes. And I wanted to know, just from a different point of view, what are some of the things you've learned by working with these athletes as opposed to, some of the other athletes that you've worked with? Are there any lessons that you've come up with or any special gratification points that you found by working with some of these guys and girls?
Well, the really cool thing about it is that their anatomy responds similar to exercise the way anybody else would who you would consider able-bodied. The difference is that their anatomy doesn't follow the same rules because they might have very specific conditions or very specific limitations or strengths or something like that. So if you work with somebody who maybe has cerebral palsy, one side of their body is going to be affected more than the other. So again, we're looking at asymmetry between left and right, and that's something that we can't necessarily stretch out effectively like we can on the side that's not affected, just due to the fact that there's a high level of neural drive holding that muscle or joint in a specific position. You work with somebody who's in a wheelchair, maybe they have a level of paralysis. So depending on where that level is, whether it's at the cervical region, the thoracic region, or the lumbar region, that's going to affect function down the line in a very specific manner. So if I work with somebody who's got like a T2 fracture versus somebody who's got a T7 fracture, that person with the T7 fracture may have the ability to contract their upper abdominal muscles, but the person with T2 has no chance of it. And it's just a matter of where that fracture is. You work with somebody who has a degenerative neural disease. Like one of my clients just got back from the Paralympics in Rio, won 2 silver medals, and then went to World Championships for track cycling in LA a couple of months ago. And he's a world champion right now. So for him, his neural disease, we've actually talked about this on the podcast, on my podcast. He doesn't have motor control or sensory control from his knees down. And he doesn't have as much motor control in his hands to be able to grip effectively or in his upper neck and upper shoulders. So when you start thinking about how do you design a program, how do you design a squat or deadlift or leg strength training program for someone who has no ankle control? Right, that becomes the challenge, right? He's a high-level track cyclist and road cyclist who can put out crazy good numbers on all of his tests, but you have to really think, well, we can't do jumps. Like he literally cannot jump and land. And we can't do things like a straight bar deadlift well with heavy loading because he can't balance. The weight's in front of him. In order to not fall over, you have to have some calf activation. He doesn't have that. When doing something like a back squat, he can't squat with a bar, so we have to use something like a Smith squat. So just figuring out how do you adapt to get the similar benefit that you're looking to get with these specific roadblocks in the way. That's where the big challenge comes. And when people start finding the results, no matter what the challenge is, if you can find a result for that person that carries over to what their goal is, and whether it's sport performance or losing weight, gaining some muscle and getting fit, whatever, that's hugely gratifying, just like it is with any other client, but especially with these guys, because they have so many, I guess you could say, roadblocks ahead of them that they have to overcome just to get to the same starting position. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, I would imagine for you, first of all, it's just a neat challenge every time you work with somebody different, figuring out, how do I put these pieces together? How do I get this person to that specific goal? What I'm always amazed at is when these people do have some sort of a roadblock like that they're able to just push and put their eye on the goal and go for it and get rid of some of the other excuses that all of us would, many of us would kind of use to get out of our training or practice or work or whatever it might be. And so what's the difference in the mindset that you've seen with some of these Olympic athletes?
Well, part of it's the type of motivation that they have. I mean, you think of somebody who has, I guess you could say, all the advantages going into something. They could find reasons to not do something and, be fine with it. Whereas somebody who might be in a wheelchair, there's so much that they already have trouble doing that when they find something that they can be successful in, they want to go hard at it because it's almost like a gratifying thing to be able to get that going. I mean, when we were watching track cycling in LA, there was one guy who had one arm and one leg. And he's going around a track at about 50, 60 kilometers an hour. And he's just pedaling with the one leg. And he's up in his handlebars trying to steer this bike with only one arm and one leg. And then he drops down into his arrow position, going 50K an hour while only having one arm, just lets go of the bike and drops down and just starts hammering it. To be able to see something like that and how much trial and error that guy had to put in, how many crashes he probably had to have to figure out how to actually drop into his arrows, let alone being able to just train on a regular basis. And then you have to live. Like a lot of these guys are not professional athletes because they're in kind of niche sports, so they're not getting federal funding depending on which country they're coming from. Some countries do way better than others as far as supporting athletes, but a lot of people have full-time jobs, they have families, they have training on top of all that. So, and then they have travel to get to these different events. You have somebody coming from the other side of the world to get to somewhere like Los Angeles or to Rio. That's time off work, that's time away from family, that's time away from coaching. There's usually personal expense going into that. And when it comes to people with any kind of physical disability or mental disability or anything like that, they usually have a harder time finding work compared to somebody who wouldn't have those obstacles in the way. So, and when it comes to that dedication, you get somebody who's working their butt off doing something and finding success with it. That motivation is entirely different than somebody who has no obstacles in front of them, but has the ability to do things well that somebody else might not.
Yeah, I think sometimes we just take for granted what we're able to do, and then you come across a situation like that where you see a challenge, and that just kind of tends to motivate you and show you how much you have to put in the work and put in the effort. Yep. All right, Dean, before we close up, I got a few questions I'd like to ask everybody at the end of the show. First one is probably the most popular. Are you more of a Caddyshack or Happy Gilmore guy?
Caddyshack has so many classic one-lines, but coming from Canada, being like the failed hockey player, I think that Happy Gilmore is probably the one to go with. Plus, how can you not love Bob Barker getting in a fist fight? That's
so true. So true. It seems like that one hits home a little bit more with the hockey part of it too. All right. I think this is going to be a very appropriate question for you. If golf were like, I usually say baseball, but I'm going to say if golf were like the WWE, and you had a walk-up song to the first tee box like you do when walking to the ring, I know you have a walk-up song in your head. What is it?
I have no idea, to be honest with you. I mean, I think a lot of it would come down to what my mood was. And I don't really take myself all that seriously. So it might be something like, why can't we be friends? So, do you remember when Homer Simpson was fighting Dredrick Tatum? And
yes,
he was a pro boxer, and Dredrick came out to like the very hard gangster rap. And then Homer comes out, why can't we be friends? I think that would be what I would do.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. If you had a chance to play 18 holes of golf with anyone in the history of the world, past, present, future, whatever, who would it be, why that person, and where would you play?
Very good question. I think it would probably be Mark Twain. Probably because, he was an avid golfer, so he enjoyed the game. I mean, his one of the best quotes I ever heard was, golf is a great walk ruined. fantastic quotes. Obviously, he knows the game well, but the way that he speaks and just the thought process that he has on how to tell stories and experiences and stuff like that, I think that would be really interesting to be able to see. You don't see too many people who can tell really good stories these days. As far as where we would play, I don't know, probably either like Augusta or Pebble Beach or the old course over in Scotland, something like that would be really cool.
Excellent. Great answer. All right. What has you most excited for what's going on in your career and moving forward, the next couple months, the next year? What do you have going on, and what's kind of the big project that you're working on?
Well, Tony Gentilcore and I just released Complete Shoulder and Hip Blueprints, which is a video series where we talk about our collective approach of how do we look at training the hips, training the shoulders, what do we do on assessments, how do we involve corrective exercise, when is mobility important. So that just came out a few months ago, and it's been doing very well, and we're actually looking to have a promotion on it coming up pretty soon too. So you and I can tie into that and maybe get that launched out pretty quick. And aside from that, summer is the time just getting a couple of vacations in. I'm actually going to BC next week to see my mom and dad. And my wife has her family in Saskatchewan, so we'll probably go there for a little bit. And after that, who knows? I've got a couple of workshops set up, but this year's kind of a relaxation year. The last couple of years have been pretty pedal to the metal as far as I've been working. So this is kind of a bit of a catch-up year, and I think next year we'll see what's on the docket. But a couple of projects that I want to start working on, nothing quite set just yet, but we'll see what actually happens with it. I'll keep you in suspense.
Awesome. Excellent. I love the idea of taking a little more relaxed time and kind of chilling out and enjoying, what's been going on, all the hard work that you've put in. Is the Complete Shoulder and Hip Blueprint, is that more for the trainers? Is that for individuals themselves, just so the audience knows who it's for?
Primarily for trainers, athletic therapists, chiros, physios, but we have had a few people who've been general population who haven't had any designation take it and wind up learning a lot from it. So, we keep the anatomy talk relatively controlled, but we explain things really well so that people know where we're coming from. But a lot of it comes down to probably about 50 to 60% of it is hands-on demonstration of exercises. So how do you progress from this phase to that phase to the other phase? So if somebody's not a trainer or a physical therapist or anything like that, they'll probably still get a lot out of it.
Awesome. I know we have a lot of fitness professionals, medical professionals that are listening to the show too. So wanted to kind of clarify for them as well. And we'll have links to all this stuff in the show notes so they can get to it as well. Any last piece of advice before we let you go?
No, the biggest thing is just make sure you're having fun out there. People take life way too seriously. So if you find something you enjoy doing, do it. Just make sure that you're doing it well, and that if it bothers you, find a different way of doing it.
Awesome, man. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on the 18 Strong podcast. And I encourage everybody to go check out all of Dean's social media, Instagram, check out the Basement of Champions, and go take a look at the belt and everything. Dean, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate all the great content that you're putting out and everything that you're doing for the training world, especially for fitness professionals and medical professionals like myself. So one more time, thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for joining us this week on the 18 Strong podcast with our special guest, Dean Somerset. If you want any more information on Dean or on his products, his information, his website, just go to 18strong.com, look up the episode number 142. We'll have links to all of his stuff, including Ruthless Mobility and the Complete Shoulder and Hip Blueprint, as well as his Instagram page where you can check out the Basement of Champions and that sweet WWE belt that we talked about. Be sure to check out the PGA Tour mobile app where you can get all of your special features on the different tournaments, the different players, all the highlights, and especially that new on-site feature that I talked about. Just go to the App Store to pick that up or go to pgatour.com. And, of course, thanks again to Rad Roller. Go to radroller.com to check out some of the greatest soft tissue massage and myofascial products on the market. As always, we want you to join our conversation over on Facebook in the 18 Strong Movement. If you haven't joined us over there, it's a great place for us to hang out, for you to ask some questions, and just to get to know everybody in the 18 Strong community. So come join us, look it up, 18 Strong Movement. Just ask to join, and we'll see if you're cool enough to let in. No, just kidding. We'll see you over there. All right, thanks again for joining us this week. We will catch up next week with another very special guest. Train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.
Thanks for listening to the 18 Strong podcast at www.18strong.com. And remember, train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.